So apparently curses and magic are real and have a scientific backing in string theory.
This will not go well.
Now listen to the entire video before you go calling me crazy.
So as usual with these videos trying to use string theory to justify some mumbo jumbo, string theory does not have any supporting evidence. Say it with me. String theory does not have any supporting evidence. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's continue.
All right, Dr. Blitz, sorry, but again, this isn't going to go well for you. And everyone, admittedly, I'm going to take a little bit of this out of context to preface Dr. Blitz's video about this guy's relation of string theory to alchemy is very well put. Just about everything in the video, I agree with Dr. Blitz about how it is no relation to string theory, but that's because it goes one step too far. Alchemy is actually nuclear physics. Transmutation, we literally call it nuclear transmutation in physics. When Ernest Rutherford and Soddy first experimentally showed that one element could turn into another element, where it split into two separate elements, the allegory is that Soddy looked at Rutherford and was like, oh, by golly, that's transmutation. Rutherford looked at Soddy and was like, you better watch your tongue. They'll have our heads for being alchemists. And from there forward, we moved on with nuclear decay. Though somewhere in the last 100 years, we turned into nuclear transmutation and just started swallowing all the words from alchemy. Because it wasn't magic. It wasn't chemistry like they've told us. They're like, oh, it's wrong, see, because none of these things are the chemistry that they said it would be. Yeah, well, they use the same words for their nuclear particles as we use for our elements. So, of course, you're not going to find the reactions that alchemy says that you're going to get with those two things if you're expecting for the chemical, because it's not explained in the chemical. But all right, so surprisingly, that's not even the point I'm trying to make with this video here. Let's continue on with Dr. Blitz's video.
So string theory is essentially saying if you were to take an electron and look at it under a super duper powerful microscope, what you would see is that the electrons are comprised of tiny vibrating strings.
So this is actually a fairly good high-level summary.
And the frequency that it vibrates at determines what the actual object is.
Just a minor nitpick here, the frequency of the oscillations on the string just determine which fundamental particles that string corresponds to. We're not talking about tables and horses here.
So every single thing we can see is just comprised of a different wavelength, essentially.
Not quite, and this assertion belies a fundamental misunderstanding of how we understand physics in the 21st century. We use effective theories. This idea was first put on rigorous grounds by Kenneth Wilson in the 1970s, and he was awarded the Nobel for this work in 1982. The idea is that in any theory of physics, we generally have an incomplete picture, whether it's because we don't have the computational tools to study a trillion atoms all interacting to give rise to condensed matter behavior, or because we don't have the experimental tools to probe distances smaller than a trillionth of a meter. However, one of the wonderful and perhaps mysterious facts about nature is that one generally doesn't need to know what's happening at one scale to be able to describe what's happening at a far different scale. So we can measure the discrepancies between the naive theory at the larger scale and then parameterize our ignorance to encapsulate all of the physics we don't understand in some experimentally determined parameters.
And a little side note here, upon editing this, I kind of had the thought about how during the Manhattan Project, General Groves wanted to keep everything compartmentalized all over the place. And in theory, this theory actually does kind of, in a way, provide theoretical proof to the fact that compartmentalized organizations like this can completely operate within each other without having to know the inner specifics of each general compartmentalized region, and that each area and scale of the compartmentalization can parameterize each of these sections of the compartments of a, classified project where each of the parts are kept compartmentalized, which I remember Oppenheimer was extremely against the idea of compartmentalizing. And I think Feynman specifically talked also about how everyone needs to know the whole big picture so we can actually understand it.
This way, we can still make good predictions about the scales we're interested in without having to know all of the details. And this process, called renormalization, works astoundingly well.
And now you're probably like, okay, but what does string theory have to do with casting a curse on someone?
Given all I've just said, one has nothing to do with the other.
But everything he said in his video, I fully agree with.
Take that piece of hair, which according to string theory is just a series of vibrating strings at your exact frequency, and you dip it in a little bit of bad luck, thereby interrupting your overall frequency.
Just to make it abundantly clear, the idea of a person having a frequency is not supported by string theory or any physics whatsoever.
And this is where it's not going to go well for you, Dr. Blitz. Except, see, Doc, if a DNA is a fractal antenna, that means the specific genetic structure of each of those DNA strands would dictate the explicit frequency spectrum each of those DNA strands would be resonant to, and as such, there would be key frequencies to every single person's DNA. I'm not saying you can dip this into bad luck like this guy is making it sound like, but you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Our DNA is a very explicit key spectrum antenna.
Unfortunately, people hear words, don't understand their context, and then proceed to make nonsensical videos about them, and probably make a few $100s in the process. Honestly, at this point, I'm not mad, just disappointed. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's continue. There's this thing called the inverse square law, and you may have heard of it. Gravity has it, electromagnetism has it. It's a property of certain kinds of forces. It's basically that if you have two things exerting a force on one another, if you double the distance between the two things, the force decreases by a factor of 4. So if you ask any physicist, their instinctual response will be, well, because we live in 3 spatial dimensions. Up, down, left, right, back, forth. In a sense, they're right, but it goes deeper than that. So when we think about these forces, we really want to think about fields. We have a gravitational field and electric field. And these things have fluxes. Gravitational flux, electric flux. You can kind of think of the flux as like the strength of the field. The more flux, the stronger the field. And so the reason why these forces decrease with the square of the distance is because the flux decreases with the square of the distance. And the reason why that happens is because as the flux leaves a charge or leaves a mass, it goes out and spreads along a sphere. And the sphere's surface area increases with the square of the distance, so the force, the flux, has to decrease with the square of the distance to keep the same amount of flux in total.
Yes, precisely. This is exactly where Tesla's work comes in. I'm going to briefly explain Nikola Tesla's idea for a global resonant grid for measuring any ship's location anywhere. As the wave expands from the point source, surface area gets so large so fast because the radius is squared in this surface area, the intensity or the energy density anywhere automatically reduces at a rate of r squared.
And this is where the 3 spatial dimensions come in. If we lived in 2 spatial dimensions, we'd be talking about a circle, not a sphere, and a circle's circumference increases with the distance, not the square of the distance, whereas for a sphere, the surface area increases with the square of the distance.
Again, yes, precisely. We don't live in free space, we live on the surface of a sphere that has waves that get trapped in waveguide channels, known as the SOFAR waveguide channel. It's because of the thermocline that occurs in the water, because of the change in temperature or salinity, that certain acoustic waves will reflect back down. The change in the properties of the water, they cause them to turn back up, and then they keep bouncing back and forth within that waveguide channel.
But we can go deeper.
When you get the SOFAR channel, you have your point source here, and the wave that expands from it, this portion of the wave isn't allowed to expand outwards. The first example is a spherical dispersion. This is cylindrical dispersion. The energy, this is the height of the SOFAR. Because all the energy that would bounce up or down gets reflected back in this thickness of the cylinder, the energy density equals, let's say we do the same 1000 joules, gets expanded, diluted if you will. The energy is contained within the surface area of the cylinder here. This goes to 2 pi times the height times the radius. As the radius increases, the energy is contained along the surface area of this. So as the energy density at any one point of this expanding cylinder, once you get to the size of going around the whole Earth, this height, basically so small and insignificant, becomes like a thin shell relative to the Earth.
But we can go deeper.
What happens is the energy density in any 1 square meter of this surface area versus any 1 square meter of this surface area at the same radius be r times higher at any radius away. What that means is, at a distance 1 radius of the Earth away, the energy available is the radius of our Earth times larger.
But we can go deeper.
We know this is a thing because whales use this method to communicate with each other around the world. Their songs can travel around the whole world when they go down deep enough. I'm going to try and draw a whale here. That's just a fish, isn't it? When they do their songs and they get trapped in these waveguide channels, the energy density around this expanding cylinder is r times larger than it would be if they did it in free space up here. We already do know sound travels much further in water to begin with, let alone once you get it trapped in the waveguide channel, it goes around the whole world. Now I would like to stress too, once it goes past the largest radial point of the Earth, those waves then begin converging back on themselves, and that's no longer an increasing area cylinder. While there still is attenuation of the wave as it goes further on the Earth, those waves begin to culminate back together. Everything we really thought about on wave transmission, not going far, kind of goes out the window.
But we can go deeper.
And this is coincidentally how they can find down pilots or submarines. This is very, very coveted information during the time of Tesla for submarine warfare. That's how you stay hidden. If you any noise you make as a submarine at this level goes much, much further too. And by putting hydrophones around, they can pick up the sound anywhere. Coincidentally, there's also waves that bounce off the ocean floor too. If we get the waves to go into resonance around the Earth, or even just setting up specific resonators in each ocean so that each ocean has a specific sound resonance to it, that you set it up, and coincidentally one of the shapes of a thing is called a sound. I wonder why. It's just a coincidence. If we have, there's the ocean floor. Sorry, Free Willy. In our previous example, we had a ship that had a Tesla coil on it that went into the water, and it could pick up the electrical oscillations. And I had said that you had to tune this specific electric resonator, the Tesla coil. Tuning you find where you pick up the amplitude the highest, that gives you your signal that where you're located. You would pan across your frequency domain to find where it hits, and you see where the amplitude increases. Instead of having specific mechanical analogs of the Tesla coil, what you just need is a mechanical oscillator, or a tuned mechanical oscillator, i.e. either just a set of tuning forks, or what do we normally have on ships already? Ship bells. The acoustic version of this, person on the ship then hang a rope off, drop a set of bells into the water. Each different bell will resonate to waves that are in the water. Cool part about it is
we can go deeper.
You just drop your bell on a line, acoustic wave going through the water around the Earth. If it's resonant to any one of the bells, it's just like the two tuning forks together. The waves that are going through the Earth, these will start resonating with this bell until it starts vibrating. And all anyone on the ship has to do is, cup on the ear with the string ocean, and you just listen to which bell is resonant, and which bell ever is resonant, you can know based off the frequency of the waveform that's created from the interference of the different waves that are going into the Earth. The beat frequency of these two waves interfering will resonate with one of these bells, and which bell resonates will tell you where you're located. I hope that makes sense. So, and I find it very interesting. There's so much lore behind the actual bells to ships. Ringing of them. I was even reading some legend that sailors believe that the soul of the ship is in its bell. And even when a ship goes down, you can still hear the soul of the ship resonating deep in the ocean. And echoes of the ship's soul can be found. Now, coincidentally, if you have a copy bell of every ship in your navy, make 2 bells for every ship. One goes on the ship, one stays at home. If you ever have a ship go down, you want to find the wreckage, bring the same bell tuned to the ship's bell, go out into the ocean somewhere, and you just ring your bell until it starts resonating the other ship's bell. And once the other ship's bell, as you stop your bell, you can listen in for the other bell. Wherever you hear this bell's signal coming from, you can triangulate the location of that downed ship at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, similarly, if the ship had a tuned Tesla coil, you could do the same thing if that was still insulated or in a box. Isn't that kind of cool? So technically, the soul of the ship is still, you can find it because its soul is still resonating. If you got the right bell to get it to resonate, you can cause that to resonate. You can cause it to then emit a sound that once you stop this one, you can find it through triangulating its position from the surface. Just like what's done for downed pilots. We'll drop a percussion mine to the bottom, and then the percussion mine will explode, sending out waves. And we have hydrophones sitting all over the place now anyway, so they just listen for this stuff all the time. Pyramids, bells, ancient navigational techniques. DNA is a fractal antenna. That means...
Honestly, at this point, I'm not mad, just disappointed. Anyway, with that out of the way, say it with me.
Just because you know physics doesn't mean you're always right. Much of our history has been diluted. That if these pyramids stopped working, we would no longer be able to navigate the oceans using just the bells. You would have to use the stars. You'd have to then have star maps and everything. And if we lost this technology and the pyramids were all defunct, and it doesn't have to be pyramids, you could get people at each of these places to just constantly putting the ground vibrations in by doing dances. Daily rotation of people doing prayers, vibrating the ground. Due to the seismoelectric or electro-seismic effect of the Earth, mechanical vibrations put into the Earth in the desert will specifically travel further, not just because of the mechanical vibrations to the Earth, but because of the piezoelectric effect of quartz and sand. The mechanical vibration, some parts of it will rectify into a electrical waveform further and faster. Which means, let's say you're out in the desert in dune land. Every step you take will send wave pulses out from where you walk. Just like in the movie Dune, where they have to do the weird step so that the sandworms don't just come and eat you alive. You have this system of sending mechanical vibrations through the ground, phased array setup. You don't have to have any giant wave, you just have to have small waves all over the place and get them coordinated directed energy weapon. If you're out in the desert and you're walking at pace, you can be triangulated anywhere in the desert. And anyone who's got good enough phased array acoustic technology can send a ground wave to Sandbar!